Well, hi everyone. My name is Matt, and we have been kind of talking for a few weeks now on what does it mean for a student, an apprentice, a follower of Jesus to grow. How do we grow? How do we actually change to become more like Jesus? And last week we touched just for a little bit on the fact that one of the key things that God intends to use, He wants to use to shape us, to make us more like Jesus, is actually our relationships with each other. We all know from experience that we become like the people we spend time with on a regular basis, like it or not. This is true of kids, it's true of teenagers, it is also true of all of us as adults. So today I want to show you how a big part of Jesus' plan for you and me for our growth, how that includes being meaningfully connected in relationship to a local church with one another, that these relationships we have here, that you actually can't be a disciple of Jesus without it. And I want to start with one of the ways Jesus says this, and I'll just tell you up front, it is very odd and somewhat confusing and a little bit bizarre. And let me show you what he says about this. He says in Luke 14:26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Now, would you agree? That's kind of an odd way to talk about the importance of community. Yes. What is he doing? What's he getting at with this? If you've ever visited, one of the problems here, if you've ever visited another culture or you've had the opportunity to travel internationally, you know that it helps to have at least some idea about the place, the country that you're visiting, some idea of their practice, their customs, their habits, like what side of the road do they drive on? That's helpful. There are plenty of places that you can go in the world and you can sit down at a restaurant as an American and you will find that the server is not like bubbly and in fact in some cases acts like they don't want you there. That doesn't mean that they're being rude, actually. It's a difference in culture. In fact, sometimes people come here from other places, other countries, and they're actually put off. Why is everybody so fake nice? Right? What do these people actually want? My point is we have to be aware of cultural differences when we're traveling cross-culturally. It's the exact same thing when it comes to the New Testament. Our world in 2022, the United States, and their world, the first century world, Middle or Near Eastern world, are often two very different places and cultures. And so what this means is that instead of bringing our cultural assumptions to the Bible and kind of reading our expectations into that, it means it's helpful to, from time to time at least, take a step back and to go, what was happening in this time, in this culture, in this place? How did that make sense? And to let that understanding shape what it means for us today. Does that make sense? I just gave you a $60,000 seminary education for free. You're welcome. So I have some background I want to lay out here. A bit of an information dump on the front end, but just hang with me because we're going to come back to this and hopefully be in a better place to see or to understand what Jesus is saying. I am drawing from a cultural anthropologist named Bruce Molina. He's also a Christian. And his book, The New Testament World, Insights from Cultural Anthropology. In other words, who is ready for some anthropology on this snowy Sunday morning? All right. I thought that was just a store in the mall. No, okay. One of the insights from Molina's work is that, broadly speaking, there are kind of two different types of cultures. There are cultures that are more individualistic oriented, and then there are cultures that are more group oriented. That is, they have a strong sense of group identity, group attachment. I just want to kind of compare and contrast the two for a minute. In individualistic oriented cultures, which would be ours, right? That's what we have. There's several characteristics. For one, each person is seen as an isolated kind of individual unit. We are brought up to stand on our own 2 feet as distinctive individuals. What this means is our sense of identity comes from within. It comes from us. It's self-determined. This makes sense because only in an individualistic culture like ours would we be so obsessed with personalities and types and read the books and I'm going to find out what are my unique strengths as an individual. And that's not bad. It just is. But what all of our language of self-discovery implies is that we have these psyches and these souls, and we are a deep emotional well of patterns and psychological motivations that basically explain everything that we do and say and how we operate in the world, and that all of that hidden inner stuff can be mined. It can be discovered, and hopefully in the process, we become better, more self-aware, more self-realized individuals. In an individualistic culture, we are responsible only for our actions. We're taught to do the right thing, most of us, alone if necessary. It doesn't matter what others say or think, just do the right thing. We've all heard if all your friends jump off of a cliff, right? Hopefully you don't. We have phrases like, be true to yourself. In this culture, in this structure, everyone basically takes care of themselves and their immediate families. Another characteristic is that we tend to view, I'm speaking, I guess, from a middle-class view, but we tend to view high-class people and low-class people as basically people like me, so much so that I have to do this when I say high and low. In our quest for independence, we're suspicious of authority. Here's something that we love. We love when a powerful person, we love when a person of means and status basically downplays their power and acts like one of us, right? Oh my gosh, can you believe Taylor Swift dropped in on that girl's Instagram post and she wished her a happy birthday? Isn't she the best? Now, I want to contrast all of that with totally different culture, a group-oriented culture. In a strong group culture, a person continually needs other people. They need the group to know who he or she really is. That's very difficult to get our minds around for us. This is why honor and shame are such big parts of these cultures, because it's not what do I think about myself that matters. Am I a person of dignity? Am I a person of honor? No. What I think about myself is irrelevant. The important question is, what does my family, what does my village, my tribe think about me? If they see in me, if they reflect back to me that I am a person of honor, for example, well, then that's what I am. But without you to tell me who I am, it would never cross my mind to, on my own, derive my identity, come up with that from within myself. In group cultures, you also see yourself as embedded and inseparably a part of the larger group. Again, your family, your tribe, your nation, your race, your religion, and so on. What this means is that people are born into extended families that offer protection, that provide identity, but it comes with a cost, right? In exchange for a very high level of commitment and solidarity with the extended family, loyalty. Another thing, in group cultures, high status people in these cultures are seen as actually very different, like as other than low status. And I know I'm oversimplifying this, but all of us in an individual culture, I can see someone who's not part of my family, tribe, race, religion, or whatever, someone very other than me, and I can recognize I have virtually nothing in common with this person, but we do have a common humanity, and I can wonder about this person and what drives them and what motivates them, what must it be like to be them, and so on. But it's not like that in a group culture, and especially ancient examples of this. If someone is outside of your group, your family, your village, your tribe, you are as connected to that person. I mean, you identify with that person as much as you yourself right now identify with a tree or relate to like a goldfish. Again, that's very strange for us. We tend to judge group cultures as rigid, as oppressive, as less developed. In a word, inferior. right? We can't imagine. We value freedom above almost everything else, and so anything that threatens that is un-American and therefore ungodly, right? Like, you mean to tell me your government tells university students what they have to major in and what their career is going to be? Like, we can't imagine that. Now, given this very brief sketch and overview, what do you think best describes which one best describes life in Jesus' world, in the world of the New Testament? Yeah, group, collectivistic awareness, a strong sense of group identity. And so in Jesus' day, this is why there were very clear boundaries. This is my family, this is my tribe, this is my people, my class, my nation. There's a high value on conformity. It never crosses your mind to be a special snowflake, ever. Because your identity doesn't come from you. Your identity comes from being loyal to, being a part of the larger group. Side note, from a religious standpoint, this is why in group cultures, oftentimes there are group conversions rather than just individual conversions. You see this in Acts where Peter and Paul are going around talking about the good news of Jesus, and many times it says that entire households were baptized or put their faith in Jesus altogether. Keep in mind, in an individualistic culture like ours, and I want to say that I like it, personal space, it works great for me. There are many advantages. It is relatively new in human history. It's a fairly recent modern development. I mean, even today, if you look out globally, most of the world's cultures are actually group. Korean, Chinese, Japanese, most African countries, pretty much everybody in history except us. We'll put it this way. In Star Trek, remember that show? The person who was all for the group, for the good of the whole, right, was this guy. What this means is that this group mentality, think about this, is so foreign to us as Westerners that we literally had to make the groupthink guy an alien. And yes, you have to be a certain age, called old, to get that, but still. Now, I'm kidding. The other thing that is important to know about strong group societies, again, we've said, individuals are not seen as individuals. They are seen as representatives of the group that they're a part of. Now, the group might be unique as a whole, those Samaritans, those tax collectors, those sinners, those groups, but it's not the individual, it's not the representative of the group who's unique. It's the whole group seen together as one. This is why, and this explains a lot, why when Philip tells Nathanael about Jesus of Nazareth, what does Nathanael say? Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Like, I've been there. I've met some people. I'm not impressed, right? Met one, you've met them all. It's why John gives us this aside. For Jews, literally in Greek, Judeans, a specific ethnic group, for Jews, do not associate with Samaritans. Everyone knows people from here don't mix with people from there. Or look what Paul writes in Titus 1. One of Crete's own prophets has said it. Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. I'm guessing if you're from the island of Crete today, this is not your life verse, right? So, to get to know one member of a group is to get to know the whole group. We do have a word for this practice, don't we? At its best, it's called stereotyping, but this goes much deeper, this kind of identifying people in these group cultures. There are some fun examples of this outside of the New Testament. During roughly the same time, Philo of Alexandria, he says this about his fellow citizens. He says, now just notice the inclusive language here. But the Egyptian is by nature an evil-eyed person, all of them. And the citizens of Alexandria burst with envy and considered that any good fortune to others was misfortune to themselves. You know anyone like that? Cicero, again, around the same time, he observed that Well, the Carthaginians, everyone knows, were frauds and liars due to their ports being visited by too many merchants. And he goes on, and the Campanians, well, they're arrogant due to the fertility and the beauty of their land. They got a lot to brag about. Well, then there's the Ligurians, who everyone knows they are hard and wild like all other people who struggle to make mountain soil productive. Now, what we have here is very little interest in personal, individual motives to explain human behavior. There's no speculation about an individual's psychological inner world. This, by the way, is why we find reading or writing around the first century to be incredibly boring. Right? How many of you read Plutarch or Josephus or Philo for fun? Right? The only thing we read from this period is the New Testament because of devotion, God reasons, right? And if we're honest, some of us struggle with it because we find it boring, right? Because first century writing, it doesn't give us the juicy details that we want. It doesn't give us the psychological drama that we're used to. Even in the New Testament, Andrew and Peter are fishing when Jesus found them, not because they had personal ambitions to save up their money and someday I'm getting out of Capernaum, I'm going to go follow my dreams. No, they are fishing because Mark says they're part of that group. So of course that's what they're doing. Matthew, the tax collector, it doesn't say he's a tax collector because big backstory, emotional drama. When he was a kid, he was never good enough for his dad, and so one day he said, I'm going to show him. It just says Matthew was a tax collector. He was in the group of more or less social outcasts. The tone is, if you've met one, you've met them all. The individual is a representative of the whole. That's Matthew's identity, or whoever. That's who he is. You guys are doing awesome so far. I'm ready to make a point. Knowing how group cultures, knowing how they operate, what does Jesus go around doing in his very group-centered world? Jesus goes around blatantly ignoring many of these group boundaries. Clean versus unclean, Jew, Gentile, Samaritan Jew, Judean, tax collectors, the righteous. He never treated people as one of those. And that's amazing. We are brought up, for many of us today, to see people as unique individuals who share a common humanity. And that's hard for us to do sometimes. He was way ahead of his time. And then how's this for radical? In calling his 12 disciples, who does he call? These are the name of the 12. Simon, who is called Peter, his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. First of all, notice, does Jesus call one disciple? No, he calls a group. He calls a group. And the first thing he does is he calls good Jewish boys raised in Torah-observant, synagogue-attending homes, Simon, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And then he adds to the list Matthew, the tax collector. And tax collectors are lumped into the category of sinners. These are Jewish people who've joined forces with the enemy, Rome, because they realized they could gain from taxing their own people. Now, in an individualistic culture, that might be forgivable, because you could say, look, nothing personal, man, right? It's just business. In this culture, it is absolutely unthinkable to go against your own people like that. And so because of this, tax collectors were included with sinners. They were excluded from life of the community, from participating in the synagogue, the social and religious hub of their life. And then look what Jesus does. He also calls Simon the Zealot. A zealot, and the name for them was Sicarii, meaning literally dagger men. What a zealot would do is sneak up in a crowd of people with a dagger hidden under their cloak and come up behind a Roman soldier and, use your imagination. But a tax collector and a zealot were at the farthest extremes possible of the political left and the political right in Jesus' day. I'm just telling you, Tucker Carlson and Michael Moore would be best friends in comparison, okay? So he brings all of these guys together, this mishmash of backgrounds and perspectives and ambitions and ideologies. He ignores all of the stereotypes, and he says, I want you to follow me. I want you to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for years on end, together, learning to practice the way of Jesus with each other. Do you think that at times that may have generated some conflict in the group? You better believe it. Of course. He says this, being my disciples, I want you to know, something that you do together. This is your brand new group identity. You've left behind your old identity markers. Your primary identity now is apprentice, follower of Jesus together with these people. And then Jesus teaches them things like love your enemy, forgive when people wrong you. But do you see what he's doing? He's not just saying, here's what the kingdom looks like, memorize these principles. No, because he knows it's not enough for us just to know stuff, that we have to apply what we know in the context of our actual relationships and kind of the messiness of life. And so he teaches them, and then he puts them together and goes, have fun, right? Have fun figuring out what forgiveness, what it looks like, Matthew, to love your enemy, Simon the Zealot, or whatever. I got to tell you, this is not the most shocking thing Jesus does in this area. There's one more detail that you need to know, and it's this. In a group culture, what's the most important relationship? Like, what's the tightest knit kind of area of loyalty? The most important relationship in a group culture is what? Does anybody have a guess? Yeah, I think I heard somebody say it. It's family. Starting not with the immediate nuclear family like we think of, but the whole extended family. In the New Testament world, your family household was much bigger. It involved your father, that was the patriarch, the mother, the firstborn son and his family, and any unmarried children. Now, the firstborn son lived in the father's house because generally he was the one who would inherit the family home. These families were, big word, patrilineal, meaning the father's bloodline was what was most important. The father's bloodline was what formed you as a social group, as a family. That bloodline got passed from father to son to grandson on the son's side, right? Reminds me of The Godfather, but this is largely what you see with biblical genealogies. It's why also there are no surnames in the Bible, because you're not a freestanding autonomous person, just so-and-so, son of so-and-so. You do see this today, I think this is interesting, in Icelandic culture. Surnames like Magnus' son, Magnus' daughter, can you hear it? Son of Magnus, daughter of Magnus. Now, the oldest son in this scenario gets married. And when that happens, the new wife moves in to her husband's extended family's home. If there are daughters living in this house, eventually they will leave the father's home when they get married, and they'll go off and live with their husband's extended families. How many of you are already going, absolutely no way? Not a chance. Yeah. In this arrangement, this is kind of sad, from our perspective, but the daughter-in-law who moves in is not technically a part of her husband's family, because remember the father's bloodline, that's what's most important, and she doesn't have it. In fact, oftentimes the daughter-in-law in these situations was treated as an outsider in her husband's family's home. That said, her status, it could actually change if and when, hopefully, she gave birth to a son. You guys are doing awesome. Gave birth to her son. Yeah, because a son grants her security and status recognition in her husband's family. Now get this. The son grows up to be his mother's ally. Over and against his father, that would be her husband, And later on, when he gets married, he's his mother's ally over and against even his own wife. This means that a wife's most important relationship in the family is that with her son. Now, in our world, in our model of like healthy family, the husband in an ideal situation would not side with his mother over and against his wife. Have fun on that car ride home. Right? In our practice, the new marriage, that's the new family, and that takes precedence. Well, the other difference of family, around family in the first century, as far as cross-gender relationships go, it's actually brother and sister who are most closely bonded together. Your closest relative, the one with whom you have the closest emotional bond with, it's your siblings, not your spouse. And this played out all kinds of ways in practice. For one thing, it meant this: if there was a brother living here and a daughter or a sister left and got married and lives with this guy and they have a falling out and they separate, she just comes and lives with her brother, and the whole thing is little more than just a mild regret for her and her brothers, because that was where it was at. So your family is your central group. In particular, a very close bond between a mother and her son, and an even closer bond between brothers and sisters. That was where you gave your loyalty. That was what required your utmost allegiance, commitment, solidarity, and so on. To break this is unthinkable. Look what happens in Mark 3. Jesus' family, actually these people, hear what Jesus is doing. The teaching, the crowds, the growing movement, the growing controversy, and they're concerned that Jesus is actually not doing so well. Now, unfortunately, we don't get their inner psychologizing, their motives, but clearly they're worried about him. More than that, in a group culture, what are they really worried about? The shame that he's going to bring on them, because the one, Jesus, represents all of them. Mark 3:21, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him. I would like to see my parents try to do that with me. They went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. He just hasn't been himself lately. See, your close relatives could conceal your offenses from the outside. They worked together as a group to protect the family honor. And so they're trying to remove Jesus from what they saw as a family scandal. A few verses later, Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother and my brothers? Whoa. Now, obviously, he's being rhetorical. He knows who his mother and his brothers are. But then look at this next thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you one of the most shocking things Jesus ever says. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him, at his followers. And he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. Now, again, in our individualistic society, for some of us, it's like, okay, fine, big deal. My family lives in Topeka anyway, and we're not even that close. In this world, nobody would do that. It's unthinkable. Jesus defines his family not by patrilineal bloodline, but by whoever does God's will. In other words, he takes the most intimate, the closest, the most important familial bonds in his day, and he redefines them around himself. Jesus' call was to put his family ahead of the patrilineal family. Which brings us to this again. When Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and doesn't hate their family, obviously hate, it's a figure of speech. What Jesus is doing, this is a way of saying, an albeit on purpose provocative way of saying, that the call of Jesus is to put his family ahead of the closest relationships, your closest familial bonds of that family. He looks at his disciples, this group of radically different people, groups that shouldn't be mixing, people with different ideologies and different ambitions and different politics and all of that, and he says, here are my brothers and sisters. This is my new family. It's interesting, in certain collectivistic or group societies today, there are still groups. If you leave the Amish, for example, you are shunned forever like you don't exist. There are certain ultra-Orthodox Jewish groups. If you get baptized into the way of Jesus, your family literally holds a funeral on your behalf. So there are plenty of group-centered cultures where if you follow Jesus, it has pretty significant consequences for how your family treats you. Jesus challenges his culture in a very bold, can you see it, like very radical way. And many, not all, but many said yes to this invitation. They committed to following Jesus in the context of their relationships with each other. They actually viewed as a new family centered around Jesus. The writers of the New Testament do not miss the implications of this. In fact, every chance they get, they go out of their way to emphasize this. Do you know what the primary language that they use to talk about our relationships with each other? Anybody guess? What the metaphor was? It was family. For example, the Greek word adelphoi, which means brothers and sisters, is used 342 times in the New Testament. They use the closest designation possible to talk about each other. It's why in Paul's letters, he's constantly talking about brothers and sisters. And it's not like the churchy, hey, brother. Like they really believe something new had happened, that God was forming them into a new household in the church. That's why Ephesians says, consequently, you're no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, members of his family. They took this to such extremes that outsiders, this was so wild to like a Roman who didn't know about Jesus, because they were like, why are you calling each other brother and sister? And brothers and sisters are meeting and getting married in these churches? I mean, what is going on? Right? And they had to explain, no, it's no funny business. It's not like that. But they had to work through all the implications of this. How would this change our stereotypes and our boundaries between class and socioeconomic status and religion and whatever? Because God is making a new household. And we're all adelphoi. We're all brothers and sisters committed to following the way of Jesus together as a family, as a community. That's what that meant for them, at least in part. The question is, what does it mean for us today to be a part of this family called the church in this culture and place? And I want to be very clear. I don't think Jesus is trying to transform our culture from an individualistic culture to a group or collectivistic culture or whatever. I think he knows that we are starting from a very different place than his own. But my question is this: if what Jesus was doing was taking what was most important to them, family, and reprioritizing around himself, reframing their values around himself as the center, what might that mean for us? And I want to say again very clearly, I like our modern Western society. I like freedom that I have to make my own choices and to live the responsibility that comes with that. I like all the advantages that come from modern technology. I love the fact I didn't ride a horse to church today, for one. But there are some downsides to our way of life. There's been a lot written in the past decade about the toxic effects of life in modern society. For example, the effects of the digital age, what that's doing to us. Nonstop digital distraction and busyness and consumerism and our hyper-individualism, our hyper-mobility. We can go anywhere, do anything, again, middle class or whatever. We ache for community. We're hyper-connected, but at the same time, we don't have community. We're more connected than ever before, but we've all discovered that connectivity is not the same as community. In survey after survey, especially during a pandemic, loneliness has skyrocketed. Sherry Turkle, who's a sociologist, psychologist out of MIT, and perhaps the world's leading expert on what technology is doing to us. She writes in her book, Alone Together, technology is seductive when what it offers meets our human vulnerabilities. And as it turns out, we are very vulnerable indeed. We are lonely, but fearful of intimacy. Digital connections may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our network life allows us to hide from each other even as we are tethered to each other. We'd rather text than talk. No wonder Mother Teresa called loneliness the leprosy of the modern world. So I want to end with 3 quick thoughts on Christian community for us. And by community, I mean intentional relationships around the way of Jesus. 1, community, I hope you can see, is non-optional for discipleship. You cannot separate your discipleship to Jesus from your relationships in community with other followers of him. The two go together. Again, if the dominant metaphor for the people of God in the New Testament is adelphoi, brothers and sisters, that means you can't be a part of the Father's family without being connected to everyone, to his family. In a Barna survey, this was interestingly before the pandemic, they found that among Christians who say spiritual growth is somewhat or very important, so yeah, I'm in, that 38%, more than a third, said that they preferred to pursue spiritual growth on my own versus with other people or in a group or whatever. And I suspect that would be a lot higher today. So a significant percentage of committed followers going, it's me and Jesus. Maybe my Bible, maybe a podcast or whatever, but me and Jesus, that's all I need. I'll be fine. And I'm just saying it doesn't work like that. Community is not the same as a group of friends, people that you have common interests, people you hang out around similar activities or enjoy similar things. Community around the way of Jesus means on purpose gathering to do the things Jesus demonstrates, commands, that the New Testament talks about. Community is even different than Christians hanging out. Because you can hang out, right? Or you can gather as Christians and do things that Jesus commands, like encouraging one another, praying for each other, confessing our sins, being open about our weakness, serving together, carrying one another's burdens, practicing forgiveness. All of that only happens in the context of relationship. It's easier than ever before to be connected with everyone, but deep with nobody. 2, community is the context where we are transformed. As we've been saying, at the surface level, we become like the people we spend time with. At a deeper level, community, intentional relationships around Jesus, it does 2 things in our transformation to make us more like Jesus. Community provides exposure and encouragement. What this means is you can't be in relationship and be vulnerable without being known, without people seeing who you really are, the good, the bad, the ugly. Community, over time, it has a way of exposing what's in us. That's why some of us don't like it very much. We're forced to deal and wrestle with all of our issues. That was true of Jesus' disciples, right? Turns out James and John had mom issues, another story. Peter had an anger problem. They had all these things that they brought to this group that then, no surprise, showed up and they had to work out and grow. It's true of us. We all have issues we can't see. It's what writers in the area of spiritual formation, they call our shadow side, right? Personal weaknesses, patterns of sin, issues around emotional health, wounds that we're dragging around from our family of origin that affect everyone we're ever in relationship with. In other words, not all of us are Peter Pan and have a high shadow awareness. Wow. Right? We don't see what we don't see. We're blind to it until we step into community. We can't grow if we're not aware of it. Again, this is so hard for us. We get in a relationship and it gets hard or awkward and we go, I'm going to find a new friend. Right? Someone challenges us and our immediate impulse is unfriend, unfollow, Someone finds out something about me that I'm ashamed of, and I go, I guess I'm going to be deceasing now from humiliation, right? I'm done. Community, though, here's the good news. It doesn't just expose us so that we are known. It's also meant to provide encouragement. It doesn't leave us there. I mean, in community, and this is so powerful, we discover that our weaknesses, that the things that we're ashamed of, that we're not alone. What we hopefully discover is that the judgment that we expected to receive, that doesn't happen, that instead we're met with grace and we're loved anyways. But here's the thing about this. If our deepest wounds come from relationships, and that's true for many of us, family of origin, mom, dad, breakup, an ex, somebody who spoke that lie into your life 20 years ago and it still affects me today. If our deepest wounds come out of our relationships, then it makes sense that our deepest healing also happens in the context of relationships. That community is where we find healing. It's a safe place where you stumble and fall and have people help you up. Last one. Community is the byproduct of our favorite word, commitment. We live in a world of options, especially if you have money. And so we hold out. We all do this. What if there's someone better out there? This church is okay, but what if there's a better church somewhere else? Because I haven't been to all of them, and maybe, right? We don't commit. We're hypermobile, which means we're often placeless. We keep everybody at arm's length. I think we see this often around here where people will say, I'm a part of Commonway, which means they come once a month or so and maybe listen to the podcast once in a while, which is great. That's a great place to start, but that is actually not community. And on the one hand, we ache for belonging, we ache for community, and yet we also want to keep all of our options open. Many of us approach relationships like we do other things. What's in it for me, with a consumer mindset? Here's a question. We know that when Jesus said this in his culture, it was very shocking. We know it's difficult to do the translation because our world and our society is a little bit different than his. My question is, if Jesus were here today and he were going to challenge us around the area of community, what might he say to us? If anyone comes to me and does not hate, fill in the blank. What buttons of ours might he push, right? What might he say? I don't know the answer. I'm guessing it may be things like convenience, consumer mindset, our personal independence and freedom, the impulse to keep all your options open. I don't know what he'd say. I think it would hurt a little bit. I think it would challenge us at the core of our being. We can't have community without commitment. If you want safe, honest, in-depth relationships, you've got to commit to a group of people. And you're going to find out that this group of people is not perfect sooner or later. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a lot about this, and he said, actually, one of the best things that can happen is for your fantasies about community. You show up, I love this place, they're amazing, they get me, it wasn't like the last place. It's like a honeymoon, right? The sooner you dispel those fantasies and realize these are imperfect people like yourself, like me, the better. Because then you can actually begin committing and experiencing community. You got to commit to people who aren't perfect and to a place. It's what St. Benedict called stability. He defined it this way. Stability is the spiritual skill of staying put to get somewhere. Isn't that good? Now, don't freak out. I'm not going to ask you to take a vow of stability to Commonway or to Muncie or anything like that. I'm just saying we've got to be rooted in relationship. That's how God made us. Really quick aside. One of my fantasies from time to time when life as a pastor is difficult, I think to myself, you know how easy it'd be to go somewhere else? You ever think about that about your job? I go somewhere else where people don't know me and I've got all these sermons and they don't know my stories and they don't know my jokes, and it's like, wow, wouldn't that be nice? But here's what I've discovered, and I've been here a long time. Some of you I've known, I've been in Muncie 19 years. Some of you I've known like my entire adult life. It is in community. And some of you guys know me, my weaknesses, my failures, my issues. I have let you down. I've had to apologize to some of you. We've had to have conversations. We've had conflict. We've had disagreement. Anything that comes up, right, in the course of long-term relationships. What I have found, as hard as that is at times, that I'm not sure if I can think of anything that's helped grow me more than having to commit, than having to wrestle with this stuff and figure it out as I am. You guys are not impressed by me, right? You know my weaknesses and all of that. And I've experienced acceptance and I've experienced grace and room for that. And it's made all the difference in my life. It takes time and intentionality. We tell people all the time in our Beyond, our kind of intro orientation class, it takes time to get connected to a community. So be patient, give it time. It takes intentionality. You cannot experience the growth that Jesus wants for you without this. Last thing is this. You're all in different stages. You're all in different seasons. There is no one size fits all there's not like a magic program that solves all of this and neatly provides community. I will say that those of you who are doing Rooted and Quick Celebration, we have 180 people in 20 groups who are participating in this starting tonight. That's huge, and a lot of that is about exactly what we've been talking about. We're going to do that again in the fall if now it was not a good season for you to consider that. It might be a small group. It might be your involvement in a men's or women's group, a Bible study. I know several people right now, this is not a program. It's people who have a friend, in the church, and they meet on a regular basis to go on walks, just to talk about life with God, what's going on. It can be a walk, but it requires intentionality. It could be a mentoring relationship. Someone here who's maybe a little bit farther ahead in their journey, you could go to that person and say, could we meet for coffee once a month? I just want to ask you questions. It could start with like the 5 minutes after church. Instead of, it's not that crowded out there. We don't have to be in a rush, right? You're going to find your car and you're going to go home. It's going to be great. But before that, we could just have an intentional practice where I'm going to hang out for 5 minutes and just try to talk to someone, meet someone new. It's all these little things. My hope for you, my challenge for you is, will you be intentional? It's non-optional. Community is the place where we are transformed. And it takes commitment, it takes time, and it takes intentionality. Will you stand with me? We'll pray. Heavenly Father, I want to say thank you. Just noticed in the past several months, actually, I can see the ways that you are growing our community, that you're deepening relationships and bringing people together in a new way. And I just want to say thank you for that. God, we want to see more of that happen. We want to see more and more we function like brothers and sisters, that we're deeply invested, deeply involved in one another's lives, that we play an active part in helping shape and grow each other so that we could become more like you. Lord, I pray that as we go, that each one of us, that you would help us to wrestle with, given our stage, given our season, what life looks like, what would it look like to engage in a community like this around the way of Jesus on purpose? And Lord, we know that might cost some time, it might cost some energy, but we believe it's worth it. Would you give us our next steps and help us to have the courage to follow you into that? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.